So thank you all for coming along this morning, and welcome to the first session of our international study program. Normally, Sheila and myself enjoy bringing the students over to sunny Brussels, but unfortunately this year that's out of the question for obvious reasons. But we're delighted that the three speakers today all hail from Waterford. So Brian Kilgallen later on, Katie Power, Grace, I should have mentioned to you, is also speaking directly after you. And Grace O'Sullivan, as you all know, is from Tramore in County Waterford and has spent 20 years or so with Greenpeace as an activist, including a period on the Rainbow Warrior, and for those of us of a certain age, that was a hugely significant period. Before Grace then served 3 years in the Shannon for the Green Party. She ran in the spring of 2019 for the European Parliament elections, and she was one of the first to accept an invitation to speak at an election hustings in WIT that I organised. And may I say, she was one of the most impressive speakers on the platform that day. I think it's a very important and particularly timely period to hear from such an eminent member of the Green Party, given the importance of environmental issues in the European Commission's work agenda, but also the upcoming national elections in Germany in September. So fingers crossed for the Greens to have a very good result there. So as always, we are recording the session, and I will turn off the recording for questions and answers at the end. So without further ado, over to Grace O'Sullivan, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Gerard. Thanks, Sheila. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Brussels. You can see behind me some of the European Parliament. I look at it, it is what it is, as they say. We're in a very unfortunate global situation. The pandemic has shown us as a globe how interconnected we are, and how very quickly a pandemic can change our ways of life. And I suppose in that frame, you know, I'm hoping that as we move through the pandemic, and as we start to reopen our societies and our economies, that we will recognize that we do have a big opportunity here to build back better. So that's very much my hope. But as Gerard said, you know, I grew up in Tramore, County Waterford, went off to sea at the age of 20 with this international environmental organization, Greenpeace. And what attracted me to Greenpeace was that there was the green aspect, which was the natural environment and nature and the protection of different species, including ourselves, and also protecting the conditions that allow life on Earth, like good quality air, and then the peace, which was peace and justice. And look, I grew up in a very simple way of thinking of things, and I just, you know, would rather see large investments from governments going into creating peace, as opposed to very often supporting arms races or munitions of mass destruction and that. And then spent 10 years at sea, brought me to Antarctica, the Arctic, all over the world, which again, you know, showed me that people are the same wherever you go. We have different, you know, we grow up and we're formed maybe through different cultures or whatever, but at the end, that we're all just flesh and blood. And for me, that international cooperation is of huge importance to me. And then I spent 10 years in our office, the Greenpeace office in Amsterdam. And along the way, I'm a skill builder. So I use every opportunity. I love lifelong learning. So I'm continuously on a pathway of learning. You know, so I studied Spanish when I was on the Greenpeace ships. When I was in the office in Amsterdam, in the headquarters, I studied Dutch. And again, you know, yourselves, that the importance of that ability to understand, to speak another language helps you to understand other cultures as well. And then from there, I came back home to Ireland and I came back to Ireland as a single parent. Things didn't work out in the marriage, so I moved back with my three very young children and went to UCC, and I studied, did distant learning ecology diploma there, which was absolutely tremendous because everything I'd seen around the world, I was now learning about it in an academic form, and it was really absolutely fantastic. And I learned about, like, even in Tramore, you know, how, and Ireland, how new species were coming into the country, like the little egret was the actual bird I was studying. And there was a little joke in UCC at the time that I was the little egret studying the little egrets. But anyway, but you know, that's a bio-indicator of climate change. So we, more than 30 years ago now, we would have had the first landfall of little egrets coming from southern Spain, France, North Africa into Ireland, and finally, and they've completely colonized the country now. And then from there, and as a single person bringing up my children and working with the Green Flags project in the schools, and then from there I did a business postgraduate diploma in WIT out in Carrick-Kenore, which is absolutely magnificent campus. And luckily enough, it's just beside the National Biodiversity Centre. So I spent many times in and out of the National Biodiversity Centre, and was working with the Heritage Council of Ireland and going into schools. So just that's just kind of my background. So when I got into politics, I was very, very nervous about it. I was, as I said, dragged in the door by a chap who gave me a cold call called Eamon Ryan. And he just rang me out of the blue. I'd never spoken to him before, 2014, and asked me would I run in the European elections. And I suppose, you know, I'm a person, I take an opportunity as it comes my way. And I always say to students and to other people I address, you know, when an opportunity comes your way, you know, obviously suss it out and you know, and if you think it's the right thing for you, I always say go forward, go in the door, check it out. Doesn't work out, you can, you know why, you'll work that out and you can back out the door again. But when opportunities don't arise very often, so when they do come, my advice to everyone is embrace them and go for it. So I did that and found myself in the Seanad, which was a huge experience, the Irish Senate, and that helped me to learn the processes of the legislative process. And my first piece of legislation that I brought into the Seanad was the microbeads and microplastic pollution bill. And even though the bill itself, it's a very simply written bill, even though it didn't get very far in terms of the stages of process, I felt my job was education. So I thought at that time, and this is 2016, no one was talking about microbeads pollution. No one was talking about the fact that most of our clothes are made of microplastic fibers. You know, so I felt that no one was connecting the fact that the ingestion of nanoplastics into the food chain and potentially into the human chain could cause health problems. So, through the research that I was doing with my team in the Seanad, we were able to bring forward the research and the data to back up the argument as to why I was bringing this legislation forward. I suppose one of the big eye-openers for me was when parties like Fianna Fáil called me to their office to explain what the legislation was. And Sinn Féin brought me, you know, members of Sinn Féin asking me. And then I realized that all of my life experience, and we all have something to bring to the table. You know, we all have something through our formative education, our upbringing, our experiences. And then I realized that was my job. That's why I was in politics. It was essentially to take my experience, not only in the environmental movement, but also as a single parent, you know, living in social housing, you know, that kind of thing, bring that. So when we talk about social inclusion, that to use that experience. So I didn't want to be an abstract politician, you know, talking about policies as something abstract, but I want to try to make it meaningful for all the people I was engaging with. Anyway, in 2014, I didn't get elected to the European Parliament, but luckily enough, I got elected to the Seanad, and then from the Seanad, I ran it again. So if at first you don't succeed, try again. That would be me. You know, I think life beats us down and it belts us and it whacks us, but you know, just kind of get back up again and one foot in front of the other and push. Sometimes you kind of have to push the head forward, but and you're in that place now. You know, some of you will be there going, God, what am I doing? You know, and the family and the pressure and COVID and God, you know, but you know, like most of us, you know, we're in that space. And if every day I come into the Parliament, it's plenary week here now in the Parliament. But every time I come in, you know, I do come in the door and I go, Jesus, what am I doing here? Am I the right person? You know, beat myself up, bash my confidence, and then I just have like the cold shower and I go forward. So I've been here elected since 2019, and it's like just to walk into the Parliament. It's such a huge organization. It's such the three institutions. It's absolutely huge. You know, it's you know, it's massive. Just the infrastructure itself around the place is massive, and you know, you'll all no doubt at some stage come here if you haven't been here already and see some of the institutions. But it is, I suppose it almost feels, do you ever look at ants on the ground when they're all busy and they're walking? And that's what it feels like. It feels like a little ant heap and everyone's so fucking busy and they're carrying their loads and, you know, and, you know, and like what amazed me at times, like I have to give myself a reality check. Just to remind myself to say hello to people, because in Tremor, you know, I know loads of people there, and you go out in the morning and say, oh, good morning, how are you, and whatever. And here it's just everyone's so busy, and you think, God, even if you were to say hello, maybe that's too much connection or something. Anyway, it's a busy place. Obviously, COVID has changed all of that, and we know more than all of you are in a space where we're looking at how we do our work. We haven't gone to Strasbourg for months and months. How we conduct our work. Do we need to be traveling back and forth the whole time? Can we work from home? So I spent several months at home through the COVID period as well. And what's my great surprise and amazement and delight, and not really a certain expectation, is technology is brilliant. It's advancing so fast. And the more we use it, the more we see, or the companies, the producers see where the shortfalls are, and then they can adapt it. And therefore we can keep advancing so that we can probably at some stage, you know, we don't have to be going into the airways like traveling all the time at the cost of the environment. So on that basis, I mean, people will travel, but at the cost of the environment. So where I am now, I'm in the Parliament, I'm a member of the Green Group, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take you through the important process I'm involved in as the rapporteur of the 8th Environment Action Programme. And so this is a legislative proposal. So it's the Commission, the European Commission came forward with a new law, and that's what I'm the chief negotiator for at the moment. I describe this, the 8th EAP, or the 8th Environment Action Programme, I describe it as like the jam in the sandwich between the European Green Deal and these things here behind me. the Sustainable Development Goals. And so I'm going to go systematically through it. As I do, I'll try to make it understandable for you through my words. As I said, it's part of the legislative process here in the EU. The European Commission makes a proposal for a new law. And the proposal goes to the two co-legislators, that being the European Parliament and the Council of the EU. And the Council of the EU is made up of the ministers of the member states' government. And each of the co-legislators, they negotiate internally. So that's the process I'm in at the moment. I'm negotiating internally with the different parties and the different groupings in the Parliament. And as I go on, I'll explain more of this and numbers and that. But what we do is, so we're trying to adopt the European Parliament position on the 8th Environmental Action Programme legislation at the moment. And then meanwhile, the European Council are doing the same thing. So what my job as the rapporteur, so one MEP from the Parliament is designated as the rapporteur on, so we call the overall piece of legislation a file on this file. And the rapporteur is in charge of getting the file through the Parliament and then negotiating with the Council to get the agreement. And then, so what's happening in that process? So a few weeks ago, I came forward with my report. So the Commission came forward with its report legislation. Then I went and amended that and changed it. And I'll explain what the changes are in a moment. But I amended it and changed that and then put it back into the system. So we made amendments to it. I'm leading the negotiations with the other MEPs, and the other MEPs that are the negotiators with me from their different political parties. So the EPP, the Renew, the S&D, the Left, which used to be called GUI. So they're called shadow rapporteurs. So I'm the main rapporteur, and then they're, just think of it like a shadow. They shadow, they're following, they're watching everything I'm doing. And then, so when I put in an amendment, they look at my amendment, and then they decide whether they can go with it, whether they're going against it, what their position is. And then we come up with finally what they call compromise amendments. So here in the Parliament, it's all about AMs and CMs. So I'm in committees all the time on PESH, on different things. And the whole time we're negotiating AMs and CMs, the amendments and compromise amendments. And I said there's seven different groups in the Parliament of different sizes. And then let me see, negotiate. So we have, usually an MEP in the course of their mandate. So the mandate is 5 years. So I was elected in 2019, and I will probably stand for re-election in 2024. So the mandate, normally a rapporteur, you get one file. So normally you won't see an MEP having been rapporteur on a number of files in the course of that mandate. And I'll explain why. Because it takes a whole year to go through that piece of legislation. So I'm going to give you the timelines. So, and I'm going to explain why. So there's 705 MEPs representing the 27 member states. Now that can change, that number, because sometimes, someone falls ill or someone, whatever, decides to leave politics or whatever. So it's roughly 705 members, MEPs representing the 27 member states. And then And like I said, it takes a year to go through a wide-ranging piece of legislation like this. So EU policy is slow. So if you're a politician, you need patience. And sometimes that's frustrating when you're in a climate crisis and a biodiversity crisis and a pandemic. But anyway, but nevertheless, it is true what they say. It is quite bureaucratic here, and things do. They're quite rigorous. They go through procedure, and it does take time. So in November, I was given the file. It took 3 months where I had very intense meetings with stakeholders. So the stakeholders are the EEB, the European Environmental Bureau, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, European Chemicals Agency, European Health Agency, lots and lots of different stakeholders to get their views. And then from now until May, where I'm negotiating with the other political groups. So literally, the minute I leave you in about half an hour, I will go directly into a prep meeting for a 2-hour shadows meeting this afternoon on the ATAP. And then we're hoping to have a vote. So I'm hoping to get the compromise amendments agreed and have a vote in June in the Parliament. But then once it's through the Parliament, then I have to bring it to the Council. And then I start the process all over again with the different member states. So they're reps. So what is the ADAP? It's a 10-year program that provides the overarching framework for EU environmental policy. So there's your connection with the SDGs, Agenda 2030, and the European Green Deal, which is pushing towards 2030 and 2050 carbon neutrality. So what was contained in the Commission's proposal? So the initial proposal from the Commission. So they set down their priorities for environmental policy until 2030. So what are they? So there's 6 thematic areas, they call them. Climate change mitigation. What does that mean? Reducing greenhouse gas emissions to reduce climate change, to create the change we need to live on this planet. Number 2, climate adaptation. And that's to help us deal with the inevitable consequences of climate change. So it's too late to stop climate change. It's happening. We're in it. I've known it since working with Greenpeace back in the 80s. We were talking about climate change. It took years to convince governments and citizens to recognize that climate change was happening, even though the evidence was there. We had so many deniers 20 years ago. But now the evidence has stacked up. So we know it's happening, and we know we have to adapt, and we know we're going to need legislation to allow us to adapt. The next area, number 3, is the circular economy. So we recognize now that we cannot continue in this wasteful economic cycle, that we create things and we throw it away. We create and throw it away. So now we're going into this circular economy. Again, you can find the actual strategies themselves on the European Commission website. The 4th one is zero pollution. So we want a toxic-free environment. Again, we can't have situations where like the example I always use is the ozone layer. When we were using a particular harmful chemical that was actually damaging the ozone layer above the planet, that was creating a hole in this layer that was leaving the sun penetrate onto the Earth's onto Earth, creating huge health problems and huge catastrophe. And what happened in that instance is it was recognized that the ozone layer was being damaged, and the ozone layer is one of our 9 planetary boundaries. So these are the planetary boundaries. So you might look up that term, the 9 planetary boundaries. And industry and citizens stopped buying, so you had consumer pressure, and industry stopped producing chemicals damaging the ozone layer, and a protocol was put in place to protect the ozone, and it's now knitting itself back together. which is a good news story. Biodiversity, number 5, biodiversity protection and restoration. Number 6 is reduce environmental pressures related to consumption and production. So again, we're living in an economy of produce, 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 profit, profit, profit. People, who cares? They're widgets. We'll just use them and abuse them as we need to in order to produce and consume. No, the 8th Environmental Action Programme is pushing away from that. So what it creates is a monitoring framework that to make sure that the process towards achieving those thematic priorities is in place, and that we can measure progress. So when we see something going wrong, we take action and we put it right. And we're in a place where we can do that now. So how do I intend to amend the proposal to strengthen it? So I want to establish the aim of a sustainable well-being economy in EU law. Now, this has been considered extremely ambitious. I already recognize I'm at the pin of my collar that others, you know, they're not getting it. But what I'm saying is, if ever we were to look at the economic model that we're using at the moment, GDP, if ever there was a time to look at it, it's now, when we're in a global pandemic. So I'm proposing that the EU should move towards an economy that measures progress by looking at more factors than GDP. And I would suggest, if you want to know more about this, to look at Google wellbeingeconomyalliance.org. So I would have met with them, and look at Donut Economics, Kate Raworth. And I know in years to come, and if we manage to push in this direction and are successful, that hopefully this day that I've spoken to you will resonate, and you'll remember that woman who came onto Zoom and talked to you about the well-being, sustainable well-being economy. So, and in addition, I want other concrete actions and obligations. And one is that I want to oblige the Commission to calculate and take into account the cost of inaction when proposing new policies. So what if we don't do it? How much is it going to cost economically, societally, and environmentally? I want to oblige the Commission to make sure that future and current and future policies are aligned with the programme's priorities. So that's what they call a compatibility check. And I'll give you examples of incoherence. So at the moment, the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, is being negotiated. And we're looking at the European Green Deal, which I'll talk about in a moment, but there's a lack of compatibility here. There's a lack of coherence. You cannot say that you're pushing in a direction and then do something different. So the same is going in terms of EU trade policy. So we need to look at trade. We need to look at trade in terms of sustainability. So we need huge change. And the word sustainability is resonating now more than ever. So again, back in the 80s, when I was with Greenpeace, we would talk about sustainability. It wasn't getting the traction. It seems now it's getting the people are waking up and it's getting the attraction. So we need, so I want to make sure that this monitoring framework takes a holistic approach and measures systemic change. And we take an ecological approach to how we do things. We have to recognize that things are interconnected and that we interact, and we have to push away from the silo way of doing things. And that was something that I worked on in the Shannon, so that the government departments in Dublin would interact and interconnect, because they were operating in silos, and that won't do it for us in terms of the global crises we're in at the moment. And I want to ensure robust accountability. So I want all three institutions to discuss progress and to every year, and to see if to acknowledge if they're not making progress, what are they going to do to speed it up. So far so good. It's a huge learning for me. It's really interesting. 27 member states. It's fantastic. It's absolutely, you know, it's simultaneous translations coming in my ear. You're dealing with people from East Europe, North Europe, us out on the Western frontier. And it is, like, I have to say, more than ever, I feel the European project is, if you can get 27 countries sitting around the table and working like literally night and day, very, very hard to make agreement, then we're moving in the right direction. It's really, really, it's a brilliant thing, the European Union on that level. Now, the European Green Deal, what is it? It's a vision from the European Commission outlining the steps it plans to take in the field of environment and climate over the mandate of this Commission from 2019 to 2024. And it's important for me to stress to you, the European Green Deal, unlike the 8th EAP, which is a piece of legislation, the European Green Deal is what we call a communication. So it's only a communication. It's not bound in legislation. And it outlines the intention of this Commission, but as I said, it's not legally binding. It's the flagship of the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And we Greens are putting, hold her to account all the time. The plan is a good one, but now we need to implement it, and that's where we're getting stuck already. The content of the European Green Deal, it commits to EU climate neutrality by 2050. So that's what we call European climate law. And you would have heard a lot around that last week as they were negotiating. So that's an aspect. So that's the intention of the deal. And that's a concrete aspect of it that now is moving into law. So that's good. It's binding. That's a binding target. And it's to ensure the transition to a climate neutral economy and to make sure it's done in a just, fair and inclusive way that leaves no one behind. So that it recognizes the 447 million citizens and recognizes that, when you close down peat plants or coal stations, how are we going to support the citizens in these areas? And the European Green Deal, it includes a number of strategies. So so there's the biodiversity strategy. So that sets out binding targets for nature restoration, protected area. So you'll hear a lot about marine protected areas, use of pesticides and fertilizers. So, the way we see the councils using the different chemicals to kill the weeds, the glyphosates and different insecticides and that. So we're looking at those. It's quite technical here, but you look at every single component that's used in these and see the harm on the environment. The other is the circular economy. As I said, the right to establish, to repair and strengthen rules around waste. So there's the new circular economy action plan, food systems, make food systems more sustainable, farm to fork strategy. Pollution, ensure a toxic-free environment, zero pollution strategy. Investments, really important, create a new set of rules to encourage investments in sustainable projects. That's the Sustainable European Investment Plan. And then lastly, industry, ensure systemic transformation of industry from major polluter to key player in the transition to carbon neutrality. That's the new EU industrial strategy. So reasons for praise. So we feel that the Commission is ambitious and we support that. And we want to see that the European Green Deal is top of the agenda and stakeholders recognise the ecological crisis we're in and the importance of pursuing it. Reasons for criticism, actions speak louder than words. So it's clear that the pressure is needed, and this is really important from us. We need the activists behind us. We need the NGOs behind us. So, when you think, oh, gee, the politicians come under pressure, I welcome that. I need the Fridays for Future. I need all of the social justice organization. I need them, you know, getting in touch with me one way or another to say, Grace, keep pushing it, keep pushing it. It helps me when we have that pressure. And also the other thing we need to avoid is the so-called greenwashing. So saying you're doing it, but not doing it in an ethical way. Some disappointing examples already is the European Climate Law. They reached agreement, but it's for a net target of 55%. And when you calculate that down, you find that actually the actual amount is 52.8% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And we say it's not enough. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, have said we need to do 65% to keep within the 1.5 Paris Agreement level. And the other area we're disappointed in is the sustainable investment rules. That's what they call taxonomy. So it takes a little bit of time to get your head around that one. But it's essentially a new law that lists what the EU considers a sustainable investment, what counts as green spending. And it includes, so it has to be genuinely green from our green perspective. And it shouldn't be unsustainable. It shouldn't support unsustainable forestry practices, for instance. So it needs to be genuine in what it's doing. And also it hasn't really ruled out entirely nuclear and gas. And gas is a fossil fuel, so it's a problem. And nuclear is not a solution because there are huge issues around nuclear. There's a massive lobby here in Brussels, massive, huge companies lobby unbelievably, and it puts us under a lot of pressure. But I just want you to be aware of that. The politicians are put under pressure. They are trying to, you know, they try to get to us to weaken our views on things. So so my role, I'm a member of the Green Group. There's 70 or so of us, and like as part of that group, we meet very regularly in these big Zoom meetings as well, and we talk through things. So we're going to keep the pressure on the Commission to ensure that they push for strong ambition in terms of the European Green Deal. We're not doing it for the sake of it. We're doing it because we have to do it. That the planet is in crisis. You look at the evidence. I've seen it. You know, I've seen the glaciers melt in Antarctica, like in the Arctic, where the Northwest Passage is completely open now because the seas are warming. So we really do have a massive crisis on our hands, and that's why we have to take action. So look, that's just kind of a whistle stop, as they say. You can follow me on social media if you want to see what I'm up to, and I would be delighted if you would do that. And now I'll just hand over to you for questions.
Okay, Grace, thanks a million for such a wide-ranging introduction there. I'm going to pause recording now. So